He looked at her worn-out sneakers and laughed, tossing a crumpled $100 bill at her feet like she was nothing more than street trash. "Buy yourself some dignity," he sneered, while the entire restaurant watched in silence. But what Bradford Halloway didn't know was that the woman wiping up his spilled latte wasn't just a struggling nobody. She was the one person holding the keys to his entire empire. And 48 hours later, when the lawyer finally read her name, aloud in a room full of sharks, the silence was deafening. This is the story of how the man who had everything lost it all to the woman he thought had nothing. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Clara Mitchell felt that grime in her bones as she pushed open the heavy glass door of the Gilded Grind, the most pretentious coffeehouse in the financial district. Clara was 26, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her hair, a mousy brown that she usually kept pulled back in a severe, sensible ponytail, was frizzed from the humidity. She wore a uniform that was 2 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from the girl she'd replaced last week, and sneakers that had lost their tread 3 winters ago. "Table 4 needs wiping, Clara. Move it!" The manager, a sweaty man named Rick, who smelled permanently of burnt milk and anxiety, barked from behind the espresso machine. "On it, Rick," Clara murmured, grabbing her spray bottle and rag. She kept her head down. That was the rule of survival she had learned over the last 3 years. Since her father's heart attack and the subsequent mountain of medical debt that had swallowed their family home in Portland, Clara had learned that invisibility was a superpower. If they didn't see you, they couldn't fire you. If they didn't notice you, they couldn't hate you. But today, invisibility was about to fail her. The bell above the door chimed, distinct and arrogant. It wasn't the polite tinkle of a regular customer. It was a sound that demanded attention. In walked Bradford Halloway. Everyone in Seattle knew the name, and most people knew the face. He was 32, with the kind of jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of marble, and a personality that suggested he'd sell the marble chips for profit. He was the heir apparent to Halloway Holdings, a real estate conglomerate that was currently gentrifying half the Pacific Northwest. He wore a navy Italian suit that cost more than Clara's entire life earnings, and he was on his phone, barking into an earpiece. "I don't care about the zoning laws, Arthur. Just buy the city councilman if you have to. I want that block demolished by June." He stormed toward the counter, bypassing the line of 3 people. No one objected. You didn't object to a Halloway in this town. Clara was scrubbing table 4, which was directly in his path. She saw him coming out of the corner of her eye and instinctively tried to shrink back, pulling her rag close to her chest. "And tell the legal team to evict the orphanage if the lease is up." Brad laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "I need that land for the new parking structure." He turned sharply, not looking where he was going, and collided hard with Clara. It happened in slow motion. Clara braced herself, but the impact sent her stumbling back. The tray she was holding, containing a half-empty pitcher of ice water and a dirty ceramic plate, clattered to the floor. The water splashed up, soaking the hem of her oversized trousers. But that wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy was the cup of artisanal dark roast Brad was holding in his other hand. The lid popped off. The black liquid erupted like a geyser, splashing directly onto the pristine white silk tie and the lapel of his navy suit. The cafe went silent. Even the hiss of the espresso machine seemed to pause in horror. Bradford Halloway froze. He looked down at his chest, watching the brown stain spread across the silk, then slowly looked up at Clara. His face turned a shade of red that clashed violently with his suit. "You," he whispered, the word dripping with venom. "You stupid, clumsy cow." Clara's hands shook. I I'm so sorry, sir. You turned so quickly I didn't see. You didn't see? Brad's voice rose to a shout, causing two businessmen in the corner to cringe. Do you know what this suit is? This is a bespoke Xenia. It's worth $5,000. That's probably what you earn in a year, isn't it? I'll get a towel, Clara stammered, reaching for the napkins on the table. Don't touch me! Brad swatted her hand away hard. The slap echoed in the room. Clara recoiled, clutching her hand to her chest. Brad stepped closer, looming over her. The smell of expensive cologne and stale coffee was suffocating. Look at you. Pathetic. You're wandering around here in rags, smelling like bleach, ruining the day of people who actually matter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. It was gold, thick with bills. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it. It hit Clara in the cheek before falling to the dirty floor near her wet sneakers. There, he sneered, his voice loud enough for the back of the room to hear. Buy yourself some dignity, and maybe a new pair of shoes. You look like you dug those out of a dumpster. Clara felt the tears prickling, hot and humiliating, behind her eyes. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Pick it up, Brad commanded. Clara stared at him. Sir, I said, pick it up. That's a tip. You people love handouts, don't you? Get on your knees and pick it up. The cruelty was so gratuitous, so unnecessary, that for a moment the air left the room. Rick, the manager, rushed over, sweating profusely. Mr. Holloway, I am so sorry. She's new. She's incompetent. Clara, get out of here. You're fired. Clara looked at Rick, stunned. Rick, please, I need this shift. My sister's medication. I don't care about your sister. Get out before I call the police for property damage. Rick yelled, desperate to appease the billionaire. Brad laughed again, adjusting his ruined jacket. Smart move, Rick. Keep the rabble out. Clara looked down at the crumpled bill on the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She slowly bent down. That's it, Brad smirked. Know your place. Clara picked up the bill. She stood up, her back straight, her eyes meeting his for the first time. They were hazel, flecked with gold, and currently burning with a quiet, terrifying fire. She reached out and tucked the bill into the breast pocket of his ruined suit, right over the coffee stain. You need this more than I do, Clara said, her voice shaking but clear. It can't buy you manners, but maybe it'll cover the dry cleaning. The silence that followed was absolute. Brad looked as if he had been slapped. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Clara untied her apron, let it drop to the floor, and walked out of the cafe into the rain. She didn't look back. She didn't see the elderly man sitting in the far booth near the window. He was dressed in a tweed suit that had seen better days, nursing a cup of Earl Grey tea. He had watched the entire exchange with hawk-like intensity. As Brad began screaming at the manager, the old man quietly pulled out a leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. He wrote down two things: Bradford Holloway, unfit, and then the girl. Find her. 2 days later, Clara was sitting on the floor of her tiny studio apartment in the Rainier Valley. The apartment was essentially a closet with a window. A mattress took up most of the floor, and the walls were damp. Her younger sister, Lily, was asleep on the mattress. Lily was 19, but looked 14. The autoimmune disorder that ravaged her joints meant she spent most days in bed, and the medication that kept the pain at bay cost $400 a month. Without the job at the Gilded Grind, Clara had exactly $72 to her name. Clara was circling ads in a discarded newspaper she'd found on the bus. Dishwasher wanted, night shift janitor, plasma donation center. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. She glanced at Lily, who stirred but didn't wake. Clara scrambled to her feet and opened the door a crack, leaving the chain on. Standing in the hallway was a man who looked entirely out of place in this crumbling apartment complex. He was tall, African-American, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, holding a black umbrella that dripped rainwater onto the peeling linoleum. "Miss Clara Mitchell?" he asked. His voice was deep and resonant, like a cello. "Who's asking?" Clara gripped the door handle. "I don't have next month's rent yet, but the landlord said I had until Friday." "I am not the landlord," the man said gently. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. "My name is Samuel Finch. I am an attorney with the firm Sterling, Finch and Associates." Clara frowned, taking the card through the crack. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with embossed lettering. "I don't have money for a lawyer. Unless you're here about the cafe? Did Brad Holloway sue me for his suit?" Panic seized her throat. "I swear I didn't mean to. Mr. Holloway has nothing to do with this visit, Miss Mitchell. May I come in? It concerns a private matter regarding the estate of a mutual acquaintance." Clara hesitated, then undid the chain. "I don't have anywhere for you to sit." "That is quite all right." Samuel Finch stepped inside, closing the door against the draught. He looked around the tiny room, his eyes lingering on the sleeping figure of Lily and the meager stack of canned soup on the counter. His expression softened, losing its professional edge for a fleeting second. "I am here on behalf of Mr. Arthur Pendleton," Samuel said. Clara shook her head. "I don't know an Arthur Pendleton." "You wouldn't know his name," Samuel corrected, "but you might recognize him. He frequented the Gilded Grind. He sat in the back booth. Tweed jacket. Always drank Earl Grey." Clara's mind flashed back. The old man. He was always there, reading thick books, looking lonely. She had refilled his tea for free a few times when Rick wasn't looking. She had brought him a cookie once because he looked sad on a rainy Tuesday. "The old gentleman," Clara said softly. "Is he okay?" "Mr. Pendleton passed away yesterday morning," Samuel said. The news hit Clara with a surprising thud. She didn't know him, not really, but he had been a fixture in her chaotic days, a calm point in the storm. "I'm sorry," she said genuinely. "He seemed kind. He was a man of great observation," Samuel said cryptically. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Mr. Pendleton was not a man of many friends. He was a recluse by choice. But he was also a man of significant means. "Means?" Clara asked. "He was wealthy, Miss Mitchell. Extremely wealthy." Clara looked at the lawyer, confused. "Okay, but what does that have to do with me? Mr. Pendleton had no children. His wife died 30 years ago. For the last decade he has been auditing humanity, if you will. Looking for character." Samuel held out the envelope. "He witnessed your interaction with Mr. Bradford Holloway 2 days ago." Clara flinched. "He saw that?" "He saw everything. He saw a man with the world at his feet act with cruelty. And he saw a woman with nothing act with integrity." Samuel stepped closer. "You are invited to the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur Pendleton. It will take place tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. at the Pendleton estate in the Highlands." Clara laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "The Highlands? Mr. Finch, I can't even afford the bus fare to the Highlands." Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Mr. Pendleton anticipated this. This is for your travel expenses. And for a dress." Clara opened the small envelope. Inside was $500 cash. "I can't take this," she whispered. "It is not a gift, Clara. It is a retainer for your time. Your presence is mandatory." Samuel turned to leave. "Oh, and one more thing." "Yes?" "Mr. Bradford Halloway will also be there." Clara froze. "Why?" Samuel Finch smiled, and for the first time, it looked like a smile that held a very sharp blade. "Because Arthur Pendleton was Bradford Halloway's great-uncle, and Bradford is expecting to inherit everything." Samuel opened the door. "Wear something black, Miss Mitchell, and bring your dignity. You're going to need it." With that, he vanished into the rainy hallway, leaving Clara holding $500 and a ticket to the lion's den. Clara stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger. With the money Samuel Finch had given her, she had gone to a consignment shop in Bellevue. She had found a vintage black dress, high-necked, long-sleeved, and tailored in a way that made her stand taller. It wasn't flashy, it was armor. She had bought sensible black pumps and pulled her frizzy hair into a sleek, tight bun at the nape of her neck. She looked severe. She looked serious. For the first time in years, she didn't look poor. "You look like a movie star," Lily whispered from her bed. Her sister was pale, her joints swollen from the rain, but her eyes were bright. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Clara replied, smoothing the fabric. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Mrs. Higgins from next door is coming to check on you at noon." Clara kissed her sister's forehead and walked out the door. She didn't take the bus this time. She called a ride-share, watching the meter tick up as they drove away from the grey, cramped streets of Rainier Valley and toward the lush, towering evergreens of the Highlands. The Highlands was a gated community where Seattle's old money lived. The timber barons, the Boeing executives, the people who owned the skyline. The houses here weren't just homes, they were statements. The car stopped at a massive wrought-iron gate. A security guard stepped out. "Name?" "Clara Mitchell," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The guard checked a clipboard. He raised an eyebrow, surprised to see her in a beat-up Honda Civic. "You're on the list. Proceed." The driveway to the Pendleton estate was a quarter-mile long, lined with rhododendrons that were older than Clara. The house itself was a Tudor Revival mansion, all stone and dark wood, looming against the grey sky like a fortress. As the car pulled up to the circular driveway, Clara saw a lineup of vehicles that made her stomach turn. A black Bentley, a silver Porsche, a sleek armored SUV with a driver waiting outside. She stepped out of her car, the gravel crunching under her new shoes. The front door, solid oak and 12 feet tall, swung open before she could knock. An elderly man in a tuxedo stood there. His face was kind, but solemn. "Miss Mitchell, welcome. I am Elias, Mr. Pendleton's house manager. Mr. Finch is expecting you in the solarium." Clara nodded, unable to speak. She followed Elias through a foyer that was larger than her entire apartment building. The walls were lined with oil paintings of stern-looking men and women. The air smelled of beeswax, old paper, and money. They reached a set of glass doors. Elias opened them, and the hum of conversation stopped dead. The solarium was a beautiful room, filled with exotic plants and overlooking the stormy Puget Sound. But the occupants were far less inviting. Bradford Halloway stood by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was wearing another suit, this one black, cut sharp enough to draw blood. Beside him was a woman who looked like a porcelain doll, blonde, perfectly made up, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than a car. This was presumably his fiancée Vanessa. Sitting on a velvet sofa were Brad's parents. His father, Grant Halloway, was a thicker, grayer version of Brad, radiating impatience. His mother, Eleanor, was looking at her phone with bored detachment. And then there was Samuel Finch, the lawyer, standing by a desk with a briefcase. When Clara walked in, Brad looked up. At first, his eyes glazed over her, dismissing her as staff. But then he frowned. He squinted. And then recognition dawned, not of her face, but of the woman he had humiliated. His jaw dropped. "What is she doing here?" Brad blurted out, his voice cracking the polite silence. Grant Holloway looked up. "Who is she, Brad?" "The waitress." Brad laughed, looking around the room as if searching for a hidden camera. "The clumsy idiot who ruined my Xenia suit 2 days ago. What is this? A joke? Did she follow me here to pay for the dry cleaning?" He took a step towards Clara, his face twisting into a sneer. "Listen, honey, you've got some nerve. Stalking me to a private funeral? Security. Miss Mitchell is an invited guest." Samuel Finch's voice cut through the air like a whip. He didn't look up from his papers. Brad froze. "Excuse me?" "She's here at the request of the deceased," Samuel said calmly. "Please, sit down, Miss Mitchell." Clara felt 5 pairs of eyes boring into her. She walked past Brad, chin high, though her legs felt like jelly. She sat in a high-backed floral chair opposite the Holloway family. "This is absurd," Vanessa muttered, looking Clara up and down with open disdain. "She's wearing polyester, Brad. I can smell it." "Uncle Arthur was senile," Grant Holloway grumbled, checking his Rolex. "He probably met her at that diner he slums in and forgot who she was. Let's just get this over with. I have a board meeting at 2. "Yes," Brad said, draining his drink and glaring at Clara. "Let's find out what trinket the old bat left for his charity case so we can kick her out." Clara folded her hands in her lap. She remembered the kindness in the old man's eyes when she had given him that free cookie. She looked at Brad, whose handsome face was marred by ugliness of spirit. He doesn't know, she thought. He has no idea that the man he calls a bat was watching him the whole time. Samuel Finch cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the glass room. "If everyone is settled," Samuel said, opening the thick leather folder, "we shall begin the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur William Pendleton." The rain began to hammer against the glass roof of the solarium, setting a rhythmic, drumming backdrop to the tension in the room. Samuel Finch adjusted his glasses. He didn't read like a lawyer, he read like a storyteller. "I, Arthur William Pendleton, being of sound mind and disposing memory, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The legal preamble dragged on. Brad tapped his foot impatiently. His father sighed audibly. They were vultures waiting for the carcass to be served. "To my loyal staff," Samuel read, "Elias Thorne and Maria Rosales, who have been my only true family for the last 20 years, I leave the sum of $500,000 each, tax-free." Brad scoffed. $1 million to the help? There goes the liquidity. Samuel ignored him. "To the Seattle Public Library, I leave my collection of first editions. To the St. Jude's Children's Hospital, I leave a donation of $2 million. Okay, Grant Holloway interrupted. "The charity stuff is fine. Get to the assets, Finch, the real estate, the portfolio. Holloway Holdings needs the capital injection from the Pendleton Trust to secure the waterfront deal." Samuel looked up over his glasses. His gaze was icy. "Patience, Mr. Holloway. Arthur was very specific about the order." He turned the page. The paper crinkled loudly. "And now, regarding the bulk of my estate," Samuel read, "which includes this property, the portfolio of stocks, the bonds, and the controlling interest in Pendleton Holloway Industries." Brad straightened up. He adjusted his tie, a new one, silk, red. He smirked at Clara. "Here we go. Don't worry, sweetie. Maybe I'll hire you to clean the pool." Samuel continued reading. I have spent the last 10 years of my life watching my family from a distance. I had hoped to see growth. I had hoped to see kindness. I had hoped to see that my nephew and grandnephew understood that wealth is a responsibility, not a weapon. The room went very quiet. Instead, Samuel read, Arthur's words coming alive. I have seen greed. I have seen arrogance. And most recently, I witnessed a display of cruelty that broke my heart. Brad's smirk faltered. He shifted in his seat. 2 days ago, I sat in a coffee shop and watched my grandnephew Bradford treat a fellow human being like garbage because of an accident. I watched him throw money at her as if she were a dog. I watched him laugh at her poverty. Brad turned pale. He was there. I also watched, Samuel read on, his voice rising, that young woman stand with dignity. I watched her return the money she desperately needed, simply to keep her self-respect. In that moment, I realized who deserved my legacy. Samuel paused. He looked directly at Brad, then at Grant, and finally he rested his eyes on Clara. Therefore, Samuel announced, I leave the sum of $1 to my grandnephew, Bradford Halloway. To my nephew, Grant, I leave my collection of gardening books, in the hopes he might learn to nurture something rather than destroy it. This is a joke, Grant whispered, his face turning purple. And, Samuel's voice boomed, I leave the remainder of my estate, valued at approximately $180 million, including the controlling 51% stake in Halloway Holdings, to Miss Clara Mitchell. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a bomb having just detonated, the split second before the shockwave hits. Clara stopped breathing. She gripped the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. $180 million. No! Brad shot out of his chair, knocking his glass over. It shattered on the stone floor. You're lying. That's a lie. You forged it, Finch. Sit down, Mr. Halloway, Samuel said, his voice steel. You gave my company to her? Brad screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. She's a waitress. She's a nobody. She washes tables for minimum wage. She can't own Halloway Holdings. She owns 51% of it, Samuel corrected, which means, effectively, she owns you. Grant Halloway stood up, his face grey. Finch, this won't stand in court. Undue influence. She must have seduced the old man. We'll contest this. We'll tie this up in litigation for 50 years. I anticipated that, Samuel said calmly. He pulled another document from the folder. Arthur recorded a video will, certified by 3 psychiatrists testifying to his sanity, specifically stating that if any Halloway contests this will, the entire estate is immediately liquidated and donated to the Cat Fanciers Association of America. Samuel smiled thinly. Do you want the cats to have your company, Grant? Or do you want to deal with Miss Mitchell? Brad looked at Clara. His eyes were wild, desperate, and filled with a hate so pure it was terrifying. He lunged toward her. You little witch, he screamed. What did you do to him? Before he could reach her, the doors opened. 2 large security guards stepped in, blocking Brad's path. Clara stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to move. She looked at Brad, the man who had towered over her 2 days ago. Now, he looked small. He looked pathetic. I didn't do anything, Brad, Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. I just handed you a napkin. You ruined my life, Brad shouted, spittle flying. No, Clara said softly. You did that yourself when you decided I wasn't a person. She turned to Samuel Finch. Mr. Finch, I think I'd like to go home now. I have a lot to think about. Of course, Miss Mitchell, Samuel said, closing the folder. The car is waiting. We have much to discuss tomorrow." Clara walked out of the solarium, leaving the Halloways screaming in the glass room as the rain poured down around them. She walked through the grand foyer, out the heavy oak doors, and into the cool, wet air. She got into the back of the waiting luxury sedan, her car now, apparently. As the car pulled away, Clara didn't look back at the mansion. She looked at her hands. They were the same hands that had scrubbed tables this morning, the same hands that had held her sister through nights of pain. But now, they held the power to destroy the people who had tried to crush her. She took a deep breath. She wasn't going to destroy them. That's what Brad would do. She was going to do something much, much worse. She was going to teach them a lesson. 1 week later, the Holloway Holdings Tower pierced the Seattle skyline, a monolith of steel and glass that screamed power. The 42nd floor, home to the executive boardroom, was usually a place of hushed tones and ruthless decisions. Today, it smelled of panic. Grant Holloway paced the length of the mahogany table. Brad sat slumped in his chair, spinning a pen, his eyes bloodshot. He hadn't slept in 3 days. The legal team had scoured Arthur Pendleton's will for a loophole, a typo, a misplaced comma, anything. They had found nothing. The old man had been thorough. "She's 5 minutes late," Grant growled, checking his watch. "Typical. Probably couldn't figure out how to operate the elevator. We offer her $5 million for the shares. Cash. Today. She'll take it." Someone like her? $5 million is more than she can count. "Make it 10, Brad muttered. "Just get her out of my company, Dad." The heavy double doors swung open, but it wasn't a confused waitress who walked in. Clara Mitchell stepped into the room. She was flanked by Samuel Finch and 2 other attorneys from Sterling, Finch and Associates. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, sharp, tailored, and authoritative. Her hair was blown out straight, shining under the recessed lighting. She carried a sleek leather portfolio. She didn't look like she was visiting. She looked like she owned the building, which, legally, she did. "Good morning, gentlemen," Clara said. Her voice was calm, devoid of the tremor that had been there a week ago. Grant stopped pacing. He put on his best shark smile, the one he used before gutting a competitor. "Miss Mitchell, glad you could make it. Please have a seat. We have a check prepared for you. $5 million. A generous offer to buy out your lucky windfall. You sign the release, take the check, and you can go back to your life. No questions asked." Clara didn't sit. She walked to the head of the table, Grant's usual seat. She placed her portfolio down on the polished wood. "I think there's a misunderstanding, Mr. Holloway," Clara said, looking Grant in the eye. "I'm not here to sell." Brad slammed his hand on the table. "Don't play games. You don't know the first thing about real estate. You pour coffee. You think you can run a billion-dollar conglomerate." Clara looked at Brad. She remembered the humiliation, the way he had laughed. She let the silence stretch for a beat too long. "I may not know real estate yet, Brad," Clara said softly. "But I know people, and I know how to read a ledger. Mr. Finch and I have spent the last 6 days reviewing the company financials." She opened her portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper down the table. It stopped perfectly in front of Brad. "Can you explain the consulting fees paid to Vertex Solutions over the last 3 years?" Clara asked. $200,000 a month, to a company registered to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, a company that, coincidentally, was formed the same week you became Vice President of Operations. The color drained from Brad's face. That's sensitive proprietary information." "It's embezzlement," Clara said. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. You've been siphoning company money to pay for your gambling debts in Vegas. Arthur knew. That's why he cut you out." Grant turned to his son, horror dawning on his face. "Brad? Is this true?" "She's lying!" Brad shrieked, his voice going high and thin. "I have the bank records," Clara continued, her voice relentless. "Now, as the majority shareholder, I have a fiduciary duty to protect this company, even from its own family." She sat down in the head chair. It was comfortable. "Here is how this is going to work," Clara announced. "Grant, you will remain as CEO for now, because the market gets jittery with sudden changes. But you answer to me. Every decision, every contract, every memo goes through my office. And me?" Brad challenged, though he looked like a cornered rat. "You can't fire me. I have a contract." "I'm not firing you, Brad," Clara said. A small, cold smile touched her lips. "I believe in second chances. You're going to keep your job, but your title is changing." "To what?" Brad asked warily. "You are currently the VP of Operations. Effective immediately, you are demoted to Community Liaison Officer." Brad blinked. "What the hell is that?" "It means you are the face of our community outreach," Clara explained. "Remember that parking structure you wanted to build? The one where you were going to evict the orphanage?" "Yeah. I'm cancelling the parking structure," Clara said. "We are donating that land to the city to build a park and a new community centre. And you, Brad, are going to oversee the project. You will work on site. You will apologize to the residents. You will shake hands, and you will listen to their needs. And if you treat a single person with disrespect, if you so much as roll your eyes at a janitor, I will fire you for cause, strip you of your severance, and hand that evidence of embezzlement over to the district attorney." Brad looked like he was going to vomit. "You want me to hang out with the poor people?" "I want you to learn, Brad," Clara said, opening a file. "Just like I had to. Report to the site at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Don't wear the Xenia suit. It might get dirty." Clara looked up at the shocked board members. "Now, let's discuss the Q3 projections. I have some thoughts on the overhead costs." For the next 2 hours, the waitress from the Gilded Grind ran the meeting with a terrifying efficiency. She asked questions they couldn't answer. She pointed out waste they had ignored. She was Arthur Pendleton's blood, through and through. When the meeting adjourned, Brad stormed out, his face a mask of fury. Grant stayed behind, looking at Clara with a strange mixture of hatred and grudging respect. "You think you've won," Grant said quietly. "But this is a shark tank, little girl. You bleed once and we'll eat you alive." "I'm not afraid of sharks, Mr. Holloway," Clara replied, packing her bag. "I've been poor. Being broke is scary. You guys, you're just loud." 3 weeks had passed. The Holloway heir demotion was the talk of the Seattle business columns. Clara had moved out of the studio apartment and into a secure, modest condo in Queen Anne with a view of the Space Needle. For the first time in her life, Lily had a private nurse, and the color was returning to her cheeks. Clara was sitting on her balcony, reviewing the blueprints for the new community center, when the buzzer rang. "Mr. Bradford Holloway is here to see you," the doorman's voice crackled over the intercom. Clara frowned. It was 9 p.m. "Send him up." She didn't change out of her oversized sweater and leggings. She wasn't trying to impress him anymore. When she opened the door, Brad was standing there. He looked different. The arrogance was dialed back, replaced by a smooth, practiced charm. He was holding a massive bouquet of white lilies, an obvious nod to her sister's name, which meant he had done his research. "Clara," he said, his voice dropping an octave, sultry and smooth. "I come in peace." He held out the flowers. Clara didn't take them. "What do you want, Brad?" "Can I come in? It's cold out here." Clara stepped aside, gesturing to the living room. Brad walked in, his eyes scanning the apartment. He seemed relieved it wasn't a mansion. It made him feel superior again. "Nice place," he lied. He set the flowers on the counter. "Look, Clara, I've been doing a lot of thinking, out there at the construction site, watching the common people." "The community," Clara corrected. "Right. The community." Brad turned to her, flashing a smile that had probably worked on 100 debutantes. "I realized something. We got off on the wrong foot. I was stressed that day at the cafe. I was having a bad quarter. I took it out on you, and that was wrong. I'm sorry." It was a good apology. It almost sounded human. "Thank you," Clara said cautiously. "Is that why you're here? To apologize?" Brad stepped closer, invading her personal space just enough to be intimate. "Not just that. I've been watching you in the board meetings, Clara. You're smart. You have fire. You remind me of me." Clara almost laughed but held it in. "We're in a unique position, aren't we?" Brad continued, his voice lowering to a whisper. "You have the shares. I have the experience. My father, he's old school. He doesn't respect you. He wants to take you down." "I know," Clara said. "But I don't," Brad lied smoothly. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, manicured. "I think we could be a power couple, Clara. Imagine it. You and me. The Holloway name and the Pendleton fortune united. No more fighting, no more board wars, just us, running the city." He looked into her eyes, turning on the full wattage of his charm. "Marry me, Clara. Let's merge. We'd be unstoppable." Clara looked at his hand, holding hers. She looked at his handsome, deceitful face. It was a seductive offer. Not the marriage, but the peace. The end of the fighting. She gently pulled her hand away. "Brad," she said softly, "do you know what I was doing before you knocked?" "Counting your money?" he joked. "I was looking at the budget for the community center. I noticed that the cement supplier you recommended is charging us 40% above market rate." Brad's smile twitched. "Premium materials, Clara. Only the best." "The supplier is owned by your college roommate," Clara said flatly. "You're still trying to steal from the company, Brad. Even while you're on probation. Even while you're standing in my living room asking me to marry you." She walked to the door and opened it. "I don't need a husband, Brad. Especially not one who thinks I'm stupid enough to fall for a bouquet of flowers and a fake apology. I need a competent employee, and right now, you're failing at that, too." Brad's face transformed. The charm evaporated, replaced by the ugly sneer she remembered so well. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "You think you're safe because you have the old man's will? You're a waitress. You're prey. And eventually, the wolves are going to come for you." "Get out!" Clara said. Brad stormed out into the hallway. "You'll regret this. You'll be begging me for help when this all crashes down." He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. Clara locked the deadbolt. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood. She knew he was right about one thing. The wolves were coming. Brad wouldn't stop. His father wouldn't stop. They wouldn't let a nobody keep their empire. She needed to be ready. Outside, in the hallway, Brad pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking with rage. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years, a number for a man who fixed problems that lawyers couldn't. "It's Holloway," Brad whispered into the phone. "Plan B. I want her gone. No, not killed, just ruined. I want her to lose everything. I want her back in the gutter where she belongs. How much?" He listened for a moment, then smiled a cruel, dark smile. "Done. Start tomorrow." The trap was sprung 3 days later. Clara arrived at Holloway Holdings early, coffee in hand, a habit she couldn't quite break, though she now bought it from a small local roaster. As she stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor, the atmosphere was wrong. It wasn't the usual quiet hum of corporate efficiency. It was the chaotic buzz of a crisis. Grant Holloway was standing in front of her office door, arms crossed, looking surprisingly smug. 2 uniformed police officers stood behind him. "Good morning, Clara," Grant said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "What's going on?" Clara asked, her grip tightening on her coffee cup. "We've had a security breach," Grant said. "A massive data leak. The confidential blueprints for the upcoming government contract were sold to a competitor in China last night. The transfer was traced to a specific IP address." He pointed a finger at her office door. "Yours." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. I was at home all night. The logs show someone used your access card to enter the building at 2 a.m., one of the officers said, stepping forward, "and the transfer was made from your terminal. Miss Mitchell, we have a warrant to search your office and your personal residence." "I didn't do this," Clara protested. "My access card is in my purse." She dug into her bag, panic rising. Her fingers brushed her wallet, her keys, but the slot where she kept her keycard was empty. "Looking for this?" Brad strolled out of the conference room. He was holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was her access card. "We found this in the stairwell," Brad said, shaking his head. "Careless, Clara. Dropping your card after a late-night espionage session." "You stole it," Clara accused, her voice shaking. "You stole it when you came to my apartment, when you asked to use the bathroom before you left." "That's a serious accusation," Brad said, widening his eyes innocently. "Do you have proof? Because we have digital footprints, video of a person in a hooded sweatshirt using your card to enter the building, and the transfer logs. It looks like the waitress decided to cash out quick." "Miss Mitchell, please come with us," the officer said, reaching for his handcuffs. Clara looked at Brad. He was smiling. It was the same smile he had worn when he threw the $100 bill at her feet. He had won. He had framed her, discredited her, and now he was going to take it all back. As the officer clicked the cuff onto her wrist, the elevator dinged. "Wait!" The voice was deep, booming, and authoritative. Samuel Finch stepped off the elevator, but he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a young man in a hoodie, carrying a laptop covered in stickers, and behind them was the head of IT security for Holloway Holdings. "Mr. Finch, this is a crime scene," Grant barked. "No, Grant," Samuel said calmly. "It's a performance, and a sloppy one at that." Samuel nodded to the young man in the hoodie. "This is Kevin. He is a forensic data analyst I hired the moment Miss Mitchell took control of the company. I anticipated that you two might try something primitive." Kevin opened his laptop. The transfer was indeed made from Miss Mitchell's terminal, he said, typing rapidly. "But the person who did it didn't realize that I installed a keystroke logger and a webcam activation script on that machine 3 days ago." Brad's smile vanished. "The script activates the webcam whenever the computer is used after hours," Kevin explained. He turned the laptop screen toward the police officers. On the screen was a grainy but undeniable video. It showed a figure sitting at Clara's desk in the dark. The figure pulled down their hood to wipe sweat from their forehead. It wasn't Clara. It was Brad. "And," Kevin added, "the timestamp on the video matches the file transfer perfectly. He used Miss Mitchell's card, yes, but he forgot the computer has eyes." The silence in the hallway was deafening. Clara looked at Brad. He looked like a ghost. He backed away, bumping into the wall. That's a deep fake. That's AI. I wasn't here." We also have your cell phone pinging the tower across the street at 2:05 a.m., Samuel Finch added, holding up a file. Officer, I believe you are arresting the wrong person. The police officer looked at the video, then at Brad. He unclicked the handcuff from Clara's wrist. Mr. Bradford Halloway, the officer said, turning toward him. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Dad! Brad screamed, looking at Grant. Do something! Grant Halloway looked at the video evidence. He looked at the police. And then he looked at his son. He saw the ruin of his family name. He saw the end of his legacy. Grant turned his back. I have nothing to say to you. Dad! Brad shrieked as the officers grabbed him. He was dragged toward the elevators, kicking and screaming, exactly like the spoiled child he had always been. Clara rubbed her wrist. She looked at Grant, who was staring out the window, defeated. You're fired, Grant, Clara said softly. Grant didn't argue. He just nodded, picked up his briefcase, and walked toward the stairs. Clara stood alone in the hallway with Samuel Finch. The empire was hers. The enemies were gone. You knew? She asked Samuel. You knew they would try this? Arthur knew. Samuel smiled. He told me, if the boy doesn't learn from the loss, he will try to cheat. Be ready. Clara looked around the gleaming office. I guess I have a lot of work to do. Yes, you do, Samuel agreed. But first, I believe Table 4 needs wiping. Clara laughed. It was a real laugh, free and light. She walked into her office, sat in the leather chair, and picked up the phone. Get me the mayor, she said. I want to talk about that orphanage. Bradford Halloway is currently serving 3 years for corporate espionage and fraud. His father, Grant, retired in disgrace to a small cabin in Montana. As for Clara Mitchell, she didn't just run Halloway Holdings, she transformed it. The Halloway Foundation is now the largest funder of affordable housing in the Pacific Northwest. She paid for her sister's treatment in full, and Lily is now studying architecture, designing homes for people who, like them, once had nothing. Clara never bought a yacht. She never bought a mansion. But every year, on the anniversary of the day she met Brad, she goes to the Gilded Grind. She orders a black coffee, sits at table 4, and tips the waitress $100, because she knows that sometimes the person cleaning the table is the one who holds the power to change the world. Talk about instant karma. Brad thought he could crush Clara like a bug, but he ended up handing her the keys to his own destruction. It just goes to show. Be careful who you step on your way up, because you might meet them on your way down, and they might just be your boss. What would you have done if you were Clara? Would you have forgiven Brad, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We post new dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, kindness is free, but karma is expensive.